In today's video, I'm going to show you how to undervolt your Ryzen 5000 series CPUs. And also, I'm going to show you in other tutorials how to do this on Intel and also for graphics cards, Radeon RX cards, and NVIDIA RTX cards. So stay tuned for those. They are coming, where I believe these videos are much more important now in 2022 than they've ever been. And that's, of course, with the rising costs of power consumption going up. For instance, my friend in Australia told me his power bills were literally going to double from 20 cents per kilowatt hour to now 40 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's just huge. And not only that, there's many more benefits to undervolting. So in my opinion, you should forget about overclocking, where Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA, what these guys do now is with their products is they essentially push them to the limits out of the box on air cooling. So if you buy these products, they're essentially getting overclocked out of the box without you even knowing. And what that does is it pushes them above where they would optimally run in terms of a sweet spot of power versus performance. Today's video is brought to you by SCD Keys. If you guys are looking for a legitimate single end user Windows 10 or even Windows 11 Pro license key, then it's as easy as clicking the link in the description below, putting in that coupon code BFTYC, and you can get these keys for as little as $14 after that discount. And once you get the key, all you have to do is then copy it and then put it into your Windows activation, hit activate, and you should be getting rid of that annoying watermark in the bottom right hand corner of your screen, as well as unlocking more features within Windows itself. So I'll put those links in the description below. Let's get back to the video. In today's video, we're going to bring that back down to a much better level, and in turn that's going to save you power, but also keep your parts, in this case the CPU and the motherboard, running cooler. And so the benefits to that is just that your parts will last a lot longer, and of course you're going to be saving money on your power bill. So two programs here on the desktop, I want you to download them, and that is Cinebench R23 and also CPU ID Hardware Monitor. These are free downloads, you don't have to pay any money for them. And so what we're going to do is open them both up, and this will essentially, one of these programs, the R23, that's going to test the performance of our CPU as well as stressing it to the max. And then CPU ID Hardware Monitor, this is going to connect to the sensors on all the PC parts, and it's going to tell us the voltages, it's going to tell us the power consumption, it's also going to tell us the temperatures. And if we successfully undervolt, we should notice that our temperatures drop, and also we'll actually just start running the benchmark here. So we click on Start, CPU multi-core, just left click that, click Start. You can make sure the minimum test duration is just off, because what we're doing here out of the box is we're just testing the default CPU clocks. And we can see here, this is the Ryzen 5 5500. It's going between 4.175 gigahertz and 4.2 gigahertz. So that's where this CPU likes to perform on all cores out of the box. And we see here, we're going to around 70 watts, straight out of the box, 70 watts power consumption. Temperatures are going over 70, well, there it goes to 75 degrees, and it's still going higher, so getting close to 76 degrees. And essentially what we're going to do after this benchmark's finished is we're going to get that baseline score. And so when we undervolt, we can then compare our score to see how much performance we're losing, but also we can see how much our power consumption is dropping. So do write this down. Do write this down here. This 4.175, I think that's the average. I'd say 4.2. So in this case, I'm going to write down 4.2 gigahertz, because we want to remember that. That's our baseline clock speed. And what I'm going to say is, I'm going to say, okay, well, AMD, what they've done with this CPU is they've pushed it to 4.2 gigahertz out of the box, and we can see the voltage here, 1.3 volts. So take note of that, 1.3 volt, 4.2 gigahertz. And so they're pushing it at this level. I believe they've pushed it too far. And so what I'm going to do is go into the BIOS very soon and then drop the speeds down just slightly, but then drop down the voltage tremendously. So here we go here, 10,252 points. That's our baseline score for this Ryzen 5 5500 out of the box. So now we remember those three things: voltage, CPU core clocks, and our score. We can then just hit the reset button here and restart our computer. And we're going to hit the delete and F2 keys while we do this. And we're going to get into our BIOS. And so I'm going to start showing you guys how to undervolt in the BIOS. Because once we're done with this, we should have some very, very different results to what we're getting out of the box with this CPU and motherboard combo. So just hitting the delete and F2 keys, we kind of want to hit them as quick as possible to make sure that we don't get back into Windows. Sometimes you can miss it and you're just wasting time. So now we're in the BIOS. You might be confused. If you're doing this on a different computer, you may be like, well, Brian, my BIOS looks different to yours. And that's because different BIOS manufacturers, MSI, Asus, Gigabyte, and ASRock, they have different looks to their BIOS, but they should all have very similar settings buried within these BIOSes. But what we got here is easy mode. As soon as we boot up our Asus BIOS, we've got easy mode. We're going to change this by hitting F7. Now, on a Gigabyte motherboard, MSI and ASRock, it might be F2, but you want to get into advanced mode. So we can see up here, we've hit the F7 key, we're in advanced mode. And so now we're in advanced mode, we've got all these different tabs that we can use the left and right arrow keys to maneuver through. And we want to go, in this case, in a Zeus BIOS, we want to go to AI Tweaker. And what you can see here is I've already locked in my XMP profiles. They're calling it DOCP. And this is very important. Besides the undervolting that we're doing today, you should always lock in your XMP profiles, especially if you're gaming. It's going to give you extra performance and you're not going to have to pay anything for it. So extra performance in games, extra performance in different applications, all by just locking in this one setting here. So we've got 3600 megahertz, that's locked in. But now we're going to go down here to our CPU core ratio. And we're going to go to, here it is right here, CPU core ratio. We're going to type in 40. And so that signifies in blocks of 100 megahertz, 100 megahertz. And so that'll be 4 gigahertz. So how they do it in a lot of BIOS is that one of these represents 100 megahertz. So there it is there, 100 megahertz. It's weird to say that, but that's basically 4 gigahertz. So we've dropped that down now from 4.2 gigahertz, which we wrote down before from Cinebench, and we're putting in 4 gigahertz. And that's just essentially what that's going to do, is that's just going to drop the speeds down a little bit because I feel like AMD have pushed this CPU, again, too far out of the box. But now that that's locked in, we're now going to go down to actually one more very important setting, and this is CPU voltage. And we can see this on the screen here, CPU voltage. We're going to hit enter, and you might see different modes here. It might be fixed voltage in different BIOSes, but we're going to go to offset mode. That's the most important, offset mode. And essentially what this is going to do is allow us to still take advantage of low power consumption states. So for instance, if you leave the house and you want to leave the computer on, it's downloading something, it'll allow the CPU to downclock still its voltages and downclock its speeds, and you can still take advantage of undervolting when it's fully ramped up. So we've got offset mode. We've changed, this might be on plus. We're going to change it to minus here. And essentially what this will do is whatever value we set now in the CPU voltage offset here, it's going to minus that from the 1.3 volt here. So from the box, we're going to go a little bit ballsy, and we're going to go for, okay, we're going to go for 100 millivolts, but the Asus BIOS is doing it just in raw volts. So we're going to go for 0.1. So we're going to type in a decimal and then just 1, and that'll lock in 0.1. Now, we can also use the plus and minus arrow keys on our keyboard as well. That's another way to go through these voltages. But we're just going to go for 100 millivolts or 0.1 volt. And after we've locked in those settings there, so we've got the 4 gigahertz, we've got the 100 millivolts, we're just going to go over now here to exit and just go to save changes and exit. You may also, on pretty much every motherboard, it's F10 as well. You can hit F10 and just go OK. So it's going to tell us we're locking in our CPU. It's just going to confirm all the settings. And we're like, yep, that's what we want. Then we're going to go OK. And now hopefully our CPU doesn't, our computer doesn't crash while we're doing this. Because 100 millivolts straight off the get-go is pretty significant. So we're going from 1.3 volt to 1.2 volt. And the thing about voltages, I know it's a little bit hard to get your head around, but when you start lowering these voltages, the power actually drops more. It's not a linear fashion with CPU voltage. So if you up at 0.1 volt, you won't be using that same percentage difference in power. It'll actually be more in a percentage difference than 1.2 to 1.3. So it's a little bit complicated, but just understand that 100 millivolts is pretty significant. So hopefully this, well, we've booted up now into Windows, so this should be fine. But again, we're opening up Cinebench R23, opening up CPU hardware ID, and we're just going to run this benchmark, see what our power consumption numbers are, see what our final score is, and see how much performance we're losing. So hopefully if we've done everything right, we should hopefully get around 10,000 points still. We're just going to start off. We're just going to start it off because hardware ID, it's taking its time. It's taking its sweet time here to load. It's like, here it is, finally, it came up. Sometimes that can mean instability too, but I don't think it's unstable. I think it should be fine. It booted up really quickly. So we're running the benchmark. We're going to get through it. We're going to see that automatically we've got 56 watts now. 56 watts. So we're down from, I think it was 70 watts. And we are down now to 56 watts. So that's a significant drop already. We're running at 4 gigahertz all cores. And we can confirm here with the CPU voltage, that's also down. And that's temperatures are down too. I think we were going over 75. Now we're at 68. So we've dropped all these three things here. But the benefits are really showing on the wattage the most. In that 50, I think it's 57 watts. That's getting close, I believe, to around it's getting close to around a 20% drop in power consumption. Now, are we going to get, when this benchmark finishes, a 20% drop in performance? Absolutely not. I can guarantee you, before this benchmark finishes, it's not going to be a 20% drop in performance. I believe it might be a few percent. At worst case scenario, I believe maybe 4%. I'm hoping it's a little bit less, just because our CPUs got lower temperatures. So let's get into it. Let's see what we got right here. It's finishing up. And there's 9,900 points. So we lost 300 points, roughly 3%, but our power consumption dropped nearly 20%. So what we're going to do now is, because that ran that benchmark absolutely fine, we're going to restart our computer, and we're going to do this in 50 millivolt increments. So we were at a minus 100 millivolt. We're going to go down now to minus 150 millivolt. And we're just going to essentially keep doing this until we find instability. And so if you're over, say for instance, you're undervolting a Ryzen 9 5900X or a Ryzen 7 5800X, you can apply this same methodology. Drop the speeds a little bit. Say for instance, the Ryzen 7 5800X is 4.6 gigahertz all cores on that benchmark in Cinebench. You can then drop that down to 4.4 in the BIOS. But we'll explain that a little bit later if you've got different SKUs of CPUs and what you can do. Let's just try and, for the meantime, go back now, deleted F2, we got into the BIOS, hitting F7, going into advanced mode, back to AI Tweaker, and we're going to go minus 0.15 volt. And we're going to lock that in. And we're going to save changes and reset. And essentially what we're looking for is if the computer boots up absolutely fine. I'm hoping it does. We're going to run that benchmark, see it runs absolutely fine again. And then we're going to go down to 0.2 volt if this all works out. So if it does, I'm going to be actually one of those people who I believe won the silicon lottery. And that's essentially when your CPU is a very good chip in that range. And it performs better than other chips, even of the same model. So for instance, there might be Ryzen 5 5500s out there that only do minus 100 millivolt. But this one here, it's booting up at a minus 150 millivolt, which is very impressive because that, hopefully if this runs okay, that means our power consumption is going to drop even more. But what we're looking out for as well, while we run this benchmark, is we're looking out for our performance number. So because we're at 4 gigahertz now, and we've already tested it at minus 100 millivolt, that was around 9,900 points. So say for instance, we do this test, and we see the performance numbers say 9,500, well, we know now that our CPU is unstable. And so we have to actually then go back into the BIOS and up the voltage a little bit. But what we're looking at so far is 4 gigahertz. Again, running all those cores at 4 gigahertz. 52 watts. So we've dropped down the power consumption even more now And it looks like it's absolutely stable at this stage. Like, it looks like it's running through this benchmark. Everything's fine. Temperatures are even dropping down more than they were before. I think versus the original temperature setting, we're down like 10 degrees, which is huge. Especially if you're gaming in summer, you definitely want to keep the heat off your motherboard and CPU. And also, while we're running this benchmark, the PC's in the background and it's barely making any noise. So that's the beauty. We can also help drop our noises. So let's get this benchmark to run through and complete. And also, if you guys have any questions or comments about undervolting, then do drop a comment down below. If you've got any of your own tips and tricks as well for people getting into this, then do drop a comment down below as well, because this is just such a good thing to help out in the tech community. I believe undervolting is just so good. I'm going to be, again, doing tutorials for all this kind of stuff. What we saw here now is now, wow, going back to this, 9,947 points. So we actually got a slight lift in performance versus the previous score. Now, Cinebench does that. It'll give you out little slightly different scores. But our power consumption went down, and that was completely stable. So we're going to go now back to restart, and we're going to go now for a minus 200 millivolt, which is incredible. If this works, for instance, if it doesn't work, then our computer essentially will just crash and we'll get an error message. But if it does work, then we're going to hopefully save even more power. If we can get that under 50 watts, I'm actually going to be very impressed. Because this CPU, I believe, is a gem. It's the golden sample of Ryzen 5 5500s. I got the golden sample, fellas. I got the golden sample. So we're just mashing that F2 delete key. We're mashing it. We're going hard. We're back in the BIOS here. And we're going in now, down to this setting. And we're going down to 0.2 volt. And ignore this yellow. Basically, this yellow, if you see the yellow, or I think if you type in 1, see the 0.5, it's red. It's like, it's dangerous. If you're undervolting, it's not dangerous. It's only dangerous if you're overclocking. So if you're going in the plus there, it'll be dangerous. But if we're undervolting, it's not going to be dangerous. You can't damage parts by undervolting them, at least when it comes to PC parts, a CPU and a motherboard. If you're doing other crazy stuff like constantly shorting stuff, then yeah, it can. But here we go here, offset mode, minus 0.2 volt. We're going to try and boot back into Windows now at 200 millivolts. Now, I'm hoping that it'll crash, because if it crashes, I can show you guys what to do. And essentially, if it crashes, your keyboard might not light up, your mouse might not light up if it's got RGB on it. And in that case, your motherboard nowadays with B450, X570, and B550 motherboards, if it comes into an unstable overclock or an unstable undervolt, essentially what it'll do is it'll reset for you so you can get into the BIOS. Wow, I'm actually very impressed. That booted up absolutely fine. We're going to load up Cinebench R23 and CPU hardware ID, but your computer will automatically reset your BIOS. But if it doesn't, you can then go on the back of your computer, hit the clear CMOS button, or you can take out the little circular battery inside the case, make sure the power's turned off and it's drained, and then you can put it back in after a minute. And that'll essentially just reset your BIOS. At that stage, you would have known that you've dropped the voltage way too far, because usually you should get instability and it should kind of make it to the BIOS or just reset itself. But if you go too low, then essentially it'll crap out where it won't even reset itself because the settings are too far off. Anyhow, we're restarting this benchmark now at minus 200 millivolt, and it's working. And I'm shocked. We shouldn't get this. This is actually incredible. We see here 1.1 volt, 47 watts, and 4 gigahertz. It did drop there momentarily. That was kind of, maybe that's the limit. Maybe that's the limit. Maybe our minus 200 millivolts is a little bit too far. We did see some kind of drop down there, some anomaly there, but we'll find out anyway. Once we get this undervolt in, we'll find out if it's unstable by, again, playing some games. We'll save this profile in if it works, and we can play some games. But here it is here, 47 watts. We've dropped the temperatures down even more, and hopefully our score still stays the same. Please, fingers are crossed. Fingers are crossed. I am hoping that the minus 200 millivolts is going to work. And there it is. We got near that 10,000 point score. And we are now using even less power than we were before. So minus 200 millivolts is looking relatively stable. I'm going to say that this CPU is very close to its optimum level. So it's very close to where it wants to be at in terms of getting that voltage for the 4 gigahertz. However, I want to try and get it to crash. So I'm going to go even crazy. Like, here's crazy. We're going even crazier. We're going for a minus 250 millivolt undervolt. And for those guys out there, you know, this shouldn't be happening. This just shouldn't be happening. 250 millivolts, actually huge. I don't know why this is working. Even 200 millivolts is pretty crazy. That's really good. I'm actually already impressed with this. But we're going to be mashing that delete and F2 key. We're going to be making sure that we get it back into the BIOS. And we're all good. So here we are right here. F7, we go to AI Tweaker. And we're going down to the undervolt settings here. And we're going to go for 0.25. So minus 250 millivolt, we're just going straight for it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just going straight for it. We're going to get into it. And we're going to see if this works. I'm expecting it to crash. I'm expecting the keyboard lights. The keyboard has lit up. Keyboard's lighting up. Will we make it to Windows? That is a different question. Yeah, and we've made it to Windows. I'm actually really surprised. Okay. We're loading up Cinebench R23. If something crashes while you do this, say for instance you load up Cinebench R23, it just crashes, then you know you've got to give it a little bit more voltage. But what we're going here for today is just, we're going for that lowest level. I actually want it to crash, but it's not crashing. And we're going to start this benchmark up. We got CPU hardware ID open once again, and we're running this benchmark. And we're at 43 watts. So when you contrast that to what we initially had at the start of this video, 70 watts, we're going down now to 43 watts total package. That's just a massive difference. I think that's close to 40% drop in power consumption. And we're only down 200 megahertz. So that's, I mean, this is what it's all about when it comes to undervolting right here. Now, keep in mind, I do believe this CPU is a lucky sample. You shouldn't be getting this good of an undervolt, but this is incredible. 43 or 44 watts, and it looks like it's still just sailing through, absolutely sailing through this benchmark right here. And so we're going to get that final score. And we're going to see that final score. We're going to see if it's over 9,900 points. Then we know that everything is running absolutely fine. And then we can restart the BIOS. Restart into the BIOS and save this profile. Wow, we got over 10,000 points. So we got the best score of any undervolt with the craziest undervolt. 44 watts maximum power consumption. Whew. Should we go for minus? We're going to go for minus 300 right now. We are going for it. We are going to just go ham on the F2 and delete keys, but we're also going to go ham on this undervolt. It's funny though, not many people say ham nowadays when it comes to undervolting. It's a sad thing. I remember back in the day, I was like, everyone was just saying, I'm going ham, man. I'm going ham. I'm going ham on ham. And that was like, that's pretty good. Go ham on ham. Okay, so our keyboard is no longer lighting up. So this is the weirdest way for our PC to, I guess, crash, is that we booted it up initially, it worked fine, but upon restarting our PC, we actually, it crashed. It didn't work. So we're gonna hold our power button down now for just 5 seconds because it's crashed out. We're going to restart the PC again. If it doesn't boot up, then we know that that 250 millivolt undervolt is actually unstable in the sense that the PC doesn't like it when it's booting up or restarting. So for some reason we got to the Windows and it ran fine, and here we are now back in the BIOS. So that's a crash. That's what we're looking out for. And we were able to get back into the BIOS now, and it was basically we're teetering on the level of instability here. So 0.25 volt is too much in that it can run the benchmark as we saw before, but it's getting too unstable in that we try to restart, we try to do this and that, and it didn't work properly. So what we're going to now do is go back to 0.2 volt, and we are going to save this as a user profile, and we'll just call this Undervolt CPU and XM. Okay, we'll just call this Undervolt and XMP because there's not enough profiles here. So we're going to save that, and then we're going to go to save changes and exit. So we can see here we're changing it back from 0.25 to 0.2, and we're saving that in a profile. So if we want to come back to this undervolt in the future and give it some tweaking, we can just load that up in the BIOS itself and then change some settings. But now we're going to get it back into Windows and essentially just run that benchmark for half an hour. And after that, we'll play some games. And so this will take a little while. I won't drag out the tutorial for 2 hours. So we're going to go do those things right now, and we'll come back with a conclusion. And now the final test was for us to run those stability tests and also play some games, where I was playing Apex Legends for a little over an hour, and we had not one hiccup. So our minus 200 millivolts is our sweet spot for our Ryzen 5 5500 CPU. And what we've seen here is a massive drop in power consumption. But when we go back to those performance numbers, we saw a very minor drop in performance, be around 2 to 3%. So we've got over a 30% drop in power, and we've only got a 3% drop in performance. So you can see here the benefits of undervolting are just massive, to the point where not only are we going to be saving power now while we're using this CPU, whether it's for gaming or doing work, we're also going to be extending the life of that CPU, extending the life of the motherboard, or if you are on an extreme budget, you can then save money and go for, say, an A320 motherboard and go with that Wraith Stealth cooler and go with even a more budget-orientated power supply if we're going to undervolt our graphics card too, which I will have a tutorial coming out very shortly for other components like Radeon GPUs, RX 6700 XT, we'll start undervolting that, and also the NVIDIA side of the fence, the RTX, and also Intel's 12th gen CPU. So we'll get undervolting tutorials done for you because I believe they're very important now in 2022. And with that aside, if you guys did enjoy today's tutorial, then be sure to hit that like button for us and let us know in the comments section below what's your experiences with undervolting. Have you been undervolting? Is there any tips and tricks that you want to share with anyone in the comments, especially people who are new to undervolting, and try and steer them in the right direction? Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always. Just like this question of the day here, which comes from Martin Byrne, and they ask, just got a 2080 Ti FE Founders Edition, brand new, $600 US. Did I get ripped off? And I wouldn't say you got ripped off on that deal, but at the same time, I don't think it's a great deal where prices of GPUs are coming down a lot, especially on the used market. There's going to be so many miners dumping GPUs, I feel, very shortly, due to the fact that crypto mining is pretty much not profitable anymore, and the crypto just keeps dropping by the day. So you will be able to get a really good deal. I mean, we're already seeing finally RTX 3060 Ti's, one of my favorite picks at MSRP in the last year. That's coming now under MSRP on the used market. So that's really good to see, really good signs for gamers who have been waiting out to get a good deal. But in sense of a 3060 Ti, I'd rather pick that up off the used market than go pay $600 for a 2080 Ti Founders. But keep in mind that the 2080 Ti is still a great card for, say, if you're using Adobe Premiere Pro and using it as a workstation GPU. Fantastic GPU there. I just think you didn't get ripped off, but you didn't exactly get a great deal. Hope that answers that question. And with that aside, if you guys have stayed this far and you're enjoying that Tech Yes content, Be sure to hit that sub button, ring that bell, and I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.